Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really complex and honestly pretty challenging topic, the psychological concept of the witch mother, based on the work of Christine Lawson. We all know this line from a fairy tale, right? Hansel and Gretel. But according to Christine Lawson, this story isn't just some fantasy. It actually holds a chilling parallel to a very real and very terrifying family dynamic. One where a mother, driven by her own inner demons, is willing to sacrifice her own child.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll define what this archetype even is. Then, we'll explore a key idea called the turn. We'll look at the specific behaviors, try to understand the fears that drive them. And finally, look at how a child actually endures this kind of reality.
All right, so let's get right into it. What exactly is the witch mother? Let's unpack the core definition. Now, this is really important. This isn't a formal clinical diagnosis you'd find in a textbook. It's a powerful archetype that Lawson uses to describe a destructive pattern. It's often linked to borderline traits, things like emotional instability and a deep fear of abandonment. But the single defining element, the thing that makes this so horrifying, is a complete reversal of the protective instinct. It's the willingness to sacrifice her child for her own emotional survival. And this brings us to this profound split at the very heart of the archetype. To the outside world, this mother can seem charming, loving, completely normal. But behind closed doors, it's a totally different story. That reality is dominated by a relentless need for control and a capacity for just startling cruelty. This quote just captures that confusion perfectly. It comes from David Smith, whose wife Susan murdered their 2 young sons. It just reveals the absolute shock that surrounds these cases. That public mask is often so convincing that the private reality seems absolutely impossible to even imagine. So this public-private duality, it leads to one of the most devastating experiences for the child, a phenomenon that Lawson calls the turn. And let's be clear, this is not just a parent having a bad day. Think of it like an emotional tornado. It is sudden, it's violent, and it's completely unpredictable. For a child, it's an experience of massive insecurity, where the one person who is supposed to be their safe harbor suddenly becomes the source of their terror. So you might be wondering, what on earth could set something like this off? Well, according to Lawson, the triggers are almost always related to the child becoming their own person. Things like showing affection for their father, expressing a different opinion, or just simply developing an identity separate from the mother. All of these can be seen as a profound betrayal or threat, and that's what triggers that terrifying shift from love to hate. Okay, so now let's dig a little deeper into some of these specific defining behaviors of this archetype. The first one is called annihilating rage, and this isn't just being angry. According to Lawson, it's a rage so intense that the child feels like they've been completely stomped out of their mother's mind. They just cease to exist as a person, and instead they become an object of pure hatred. This quote from serial killer Edmund Kemper, talking about his youth, it gives us this raw, chilling glimpse into what these conflicts are like. It really highlights the visceral, all-consuming, and just deeply confusing feeling of being in a constant state of war with your own mother. The second key characteristic is this tendency to organize a campaign of denigration. The witch archetype doesn't just attack her target directly. She systematically recruits allies, other family members, friends, even professionals, to isolate and discredit the person she's focused her rage on. The story of Joan and Christina Crawford is a classic example of this. You see, the mother creates 2 completely different stories, one of love, which she sends directly to the child, and one of condemnation that she tells the rest of the world. This just creates this web of confusion and pretty much guarantees that the child's reality is never, ever validated. So this all leads to the crucial question: why? What on earth drives this kind of behavior? Well, according to Lawson, the witch's horrifying external actions are actually a desperate defense against an even more terrifying inner world. Lawson actually goes back to the fairy tale to explain this. This keen sense of smell is a metaphor. It's for a laser-like ability to detect human weakness and vulnerability, not to nurture it, but to exploit it as a way to manage her own internal chaos. This is what's at the core of her experience. Underneath all that rage is an overwhelming self-hatred, a profound belief that she is evil, and this dual terror of both being abandoned and being controlled. All the hostility you see on the outside, it's a mask. It's an attempt to project those unbearable feelings onto someone else.
And often, that's her most vulnerable target, her child. And that brings us to the most critical part of this explainer. What is the impact on the child, and how do they possibly survive an environment like this? The child is trapped in what Lawson describes as a truly hopeless situation. Their entire world is defined by their mother's rage, her fear, and the projection of her own self-hatred. There is no safe harbor, because the source of their pain is the very person who is meant to be their protector. So how do they cope? Well, survival becomes an art of emotional camouflage. The child learns to become invisible, to make no demands, to have no needs. They become hyper-attuned experts in reading nonverbal cues, a shift in tone, a fleeting look, the tensing of a shoulder, because their physical and emotional safety depends entirely on predicting that next storm. These are the messages that Lawson says get delivered sometimes in words, sometimes just in actions, and they create a foundation of terror and worthlessness. And I think the most important takeaway here is this. While the archetype of the witch mother sounds like something from a dark fairy tale, for some children it is the grim, unspoken reality they're forced to navigate every single day.